Hi, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mrs. Swanson, and also my friend, Lulu the dog. We are going to talk about the overview of the cell cycle today. So our learning objectives are our cells always preparing to divide. We want to be able to explain the answer to that question, explain the parts and steps involved in the cell cycle, and then also explain interphase. So yesterday we looked at the cell size lab, and we looked at why cells are as small as they are. And we also tried to answer this question of when does cell division happen? There are a couple reasons when cell division could take place. First of all, an overview is that we are talking about a process called mitosis. And mitosis, as you guys can see here, is this making identical cells from one cell. And this could happen for a variety of reasons. Number one is to replace any missing cells. Let's say you go riding your bike and you fall down, you have a big gash in your knee. Those cells are going to send out signals to try and repair the cells that have been damaged. Another reason is when cells become too large and inefficient. And that's really what we saw with that lab yesterday. So as cells become bigger and bigger, they can't get the nutrients that they need to the center of that cell. Remember that white part of our cell model yesterday? That's a very unhappy cell. It's not getting nutrients, it's not getting oxygen, and it also isn't able to get its waste out. So as that surface area to volume ratio becomes too low, all right, it is going to trigger the cell to divide, and that increases that surface area to volume ratio. Finally, when you grow, you just need a lot of mitosis to take place. My girls are 7 and 10, and there's a lot of mitosis taking place as they oftentimes grow several inches in a year. And then finally, the last reasons that cell division would happen is because of asexual reproduction. And that's simply cell or organisms that make copies of themselves. So they are a clone of that original organism. And that's just one way that organisms can reproduce. Sexual reproduction, which involves a process called meiosis, is something we will discuss in our genetics unit. So stay tuned for that. So just once again, a reminder from yesterday. So these larger cells are going to divide into smaller cells. And the reason they do that is because they become more efficient. We have that parent cell going through cell division, which is the process we're going to talk about today. And we end up with 2 daughter cells. And the one thing that we want to talk about is that these are identical. All right. And this is the process of mitosis, making of these identical daughter cells. Here's this inefficiency once again. So big cells, they have a large surface area, they have a large volume, but they have a very low surface area to volume ratio versus our smaller cells have a low surface area, a low volume, but a very high surface area to volume ratio. So as a cell, once again, goes in this direction and grows, that surface area to volume ratio gets lower and lower, and that's going to trigger that cell to divide into a smaller cell, which then has a higher surface area to volume ratio. So finally, we are going to answer this true-false question in our overview today. Cells spend most of their time in cell division. And this answer, okay, is false. And we're going to want to give evidence of why. One of the reasons that cells are not normally dividing is that they have a job to do. So cells need to perform their normal cell functions. So if there is a skin cell, okay, its job is to protect. If it is a cell that lines the intestines, they need to help absorb food. All right, nerve cells need to be efficient in sending signals from the brain to the rest of your body. You think about the cells in your heart muscles, they just process a lot of energy. So cells need to do what their job is. So they cannot do their job when they are dividing. So cells spend most of their time in a phase called interphase, which is where they complete their normal cell functions. So before we talk about an overview of the cell cycle, we first need to go through some terminology with DNA. So first of all, DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. It's the genetic material that we talked about is found in the nucleus of our cells. So let's talk a little bit more about that DNA. All right, so let's take a look at this confusing C terminology. First of all, you've heard of a chromosome, all right? And so a chromosome is simply condensed DNA. And we can see it in this picture over here. This is the form the genetic material takes when the cell is actively dividing. However, we just mentioned that for most of the time, the cell is in a phase called interphase. And when it's in interphase, it needs to work with that DNA. And so it is in a different form called chromatin. It's much more loosely organized. But if you think about the DNA within most of your cells, your DNA is probably about 2 to 3 meters in length. We're talking about 3 billion base pairs, okay? If we were to think about all of the DNA in every single one of your cells, remember you have trillions of cells, the DNA in our cells would be twice the diameter of the solar system. But in this form called chromatin, it is coiled up, but kind of more loosely, all right? And it looks noodle-like. And I always joke with my students in this noodle-like DNA form, it looks like SpaghettiOs. It looks like spaghetti. And just so you know that you can get spaghetti in a tin can. So that's how I always try to remember it. Chromatin is spaghetti in a tin can. And once again, this is the form that our genetic material takes in a phase called interphase, where cells spend most of their time. A couple other C vocab words is chromatid. So a chromatid is another phase of a chromosome. It's a single strand of super coiled DNA, and it's wrapped around those histone proteins. And after we have duplicated our DNA, we get 2 sister chromatids. And this is what gives our chromosome that X kind of appearance when it's actively dividing, because it has 1 sister chromatid over here and has another sister chromatid over here. The important thing for you to remember about chromatids or sister chromatids is that they are identical genetic information. And then we have our centromere, which is right in the middle there, and that is what holds our sister chromatids together. So let's talk about the cell cycle. I'm going to give kind of a summary overview, and then we will review and put it into a similar graphic that you have within your CC. So once again, the cell cycle, you can think of it as the lifespan of a cell, all right, kind of like the seasons of a year. Interphase, once again, we've been talking about, is where a cell spends the majority of its life. We can divide interphase into 3 different parts. First one is G1. This is where the cell is going to copy its organelles. It's going to grow to the adult size. And this, most importantly, is where normal cell functions occur. So we talked earlier about how cells, if you're a nerve cell, you need to carry those impulses from the brain to other parts of the body. You need to absorb. So cells carry out their normal cell activities in the G1 phase. The next phase is called the S phase. And you can think of it as like synthesis. So what happens during our S phase is our genetic material gets copied. So the DNA gets replicated. And then finally, the last part of interphase is G2. It's another growth phase. And what happens here is we're simply growing enough cell membrane and also cytoplasm to prepare for that cell division. All right, so we're going to look at the cell cycle overview and apply the notes that we just took from the previous slide and apply it to this diagram. I think this matches up with what you have in your CC. If it does not, just draw this on a blank sheet of paper. But the first thing we want to do is look for the biggest stage, which we just talked about, is that called interphase. All right, and when you look at your diagram, you want to make sure that you have the phase that is broken up into 3 smaller phases. So once again, interphase, the first part of interphase, or the first step, is the G1 phase. And remember what happens in this stage? You're right. So the biggest thing is normal cell functions. Okay, cells are being the kind of cell that they are and doing that job. The second thing is we're going to have some growth. All right, our cell needs to get to the actual size that it needs to be as it's just come through cytokinesis. So there's a little growth that needs to take place. And then finally, we need to copy our organelles. So our Golgi bodies, our ER, our lysosomes. We need to make sure that we have working copies of those organelles in our cell. All right, after G1, we head into the next phase, which is the S phase. All right, and we synthesize or we copy our DNA. So I want to go back and also apply what we've been talking about with our genetic material. Remember that we talked about the name for our genetic material within this interphase is chromatin. Remember, you can get spaghetti in a tin can. However, I do not recommend it. And so as we have our chromatin in our interphase, it gets copied in that S phase. So our squiggly, slightly condensed, but not super condensed form of genetic material. All right, we are going to head into the last part of interphase, which is G2, another growth phase. And we are preparing for cell division at this point. So what needs to grow is our cell membrane and also our cytoplasm. To account for that cell division. So I'm going to put my genetic material. It's still in chromatin phase. Oops, wrong color. But it's just about to condense into our chromosomes. All right, so now we are headed into another part of the cell cycle. All right, and it includes all of this here. And this is called the M phase. Let's see if I can get that written in there. And M phase includes 2 important parts. So I'm going to talk about this first one right here. If you can see, I'm kind of separating that off. Let's see if I can get a different color here. And we are going to call this mitosis. And mitosis is the division of our nucleus, And the second part of the M phase is called cytokinesis. And cytokinesis is the separation of our cytoplasm. So there we have it. When we go into mitosis, there are several different phases, and we can mark those right now. I always say mitosis is PMAT. Prophase, metaphase, anaphase, PMA, and telophase. Okay, PMAT, mitosis, that division of our nucleus. Once again, in our nucleus is where we find our genetic material. So as we head into mitosis, our genetic material is going to condense, and that is where we get those super coiled forms of our chromosome, okay, our sister chromatids. And once again, they are held together by that centromere. All right, and so as you talk about mitosis, it's going to be talking about the different, what's going on with our sister chromatids. All right, so here's an overview of our cell cycle. Once again, cells spend most of their time in interphase. Interphase can be broken up into 3 stages: the G1, our S phase, and our G2 phase. They are carrying out normal cell activities and growing. They're replicating their DNA and then preparing for cell division. As you can see, cells do not spend the majority of their time dividing. Then we are looking here, we have the M phase, which includes mitosis and cytokinesis. We can break the mitosis up into PMAT, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, and then finally cytokinesis. The end product of mitosis is 2 daughter cells, and the important thing is that they are identical, that they have the same genetic information. And finally, here you go. This final graphic shows how long it would take in each of the different phases. You will do a onion root tip lab online, and you can kind of see how much time cells spend in each of these different phases. In terms of time, it really is going to depend on what kind of cell you're talking about. Cells have different jobs, and based on their different jobs, they're going to divide either more frequently or less frequently. Cells that divide quickly or frequently are going to be our skin cells, our hair follicles, our intestinal cells. But then there are some cells that don't ever divide. So like mature blood cells, nerve cells, and some muscle cells. So this says ours. That is totally dependent on what kind of cell it is. All right, so hopefully now you can answer our true-false question, which is cells spend the majority of their time in cell division. All right, so here's our cell division, okay? And also understanding that cell division includes mitosis and cytokinesis. All right, ladies and gentlemen, have a great day.